Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be doing some speculation about phantom jobs. Now, if you missed the most recent letter from the producer live, phantom jobs are one of those zone-specific mechanics that we're going to be getting in the upcoming exploration content, the Crescent Island. Now, it's largely based off Final Fantasy V, and as such they're teasing doing all sorts of jobs that we may never actually see in Final Fantasy XIV. So, I want to go over the information that we have, which is not a whole lot, and then talk a little bit about some of my predictions of things we just might see, because exploration content has shown us in the past that they're willing to let things get a little wild. And so I think we should let our more creative pieces of our mind kind of go to those places that we normally say about, like, oh, maybe if base 14 did this, that you can actually kind of use those thoughts here. So we are going to do that in this video. Before we go any further though, this video does have a sponsor, Magic Spoon. If you've been around the channel for a while, you recognize them, but if not, let me give you the down low. Magic Spoon is a brand that gives me all sorts of options for my protein intake, just so I can keep it varied. As a cereal snacker, it's always good to have something like their treat bars around, which I'll usually devour far too quickly every month that they send them, and their new granola, which I also devour probably way too quickly. Listen, they both really hit the spot when I need a good snack to sate my body after a tough workout, and I do like snacking. Now, if you'd like to try Magic Spoon while also supporting the channel, then click the link below to get some today. Build your own custom box of product with tons of available flavors. Again, the treat bars and the granola. Oh, trust me, you're not going to be able to stop yourself. Best of all, use my link and discount code Mr. Happy to get $5 off of your box. You can also get it at your local grocery store or even on Amazon. And if you don't like it, Magic Spoon has a 100% happiness guarantee. Let them know and they'll refund you, no questions asked. So click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen and use code Mr. Happy to get $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/Mr. Happy to save $5 on your order. It even works in Canada and the UK. Thanks again to Magic Spoon for sponsoring, and now on with the video. So first off, we have a couple of slides of information on phantom jobs from the most recent letter from the producer live. This first one is specifically detailing what a phantom job is. On the Isle, players will have access to unique jobs known as phantom jobs. When equipped, they will grant players new actions that can be used alongside their main job. So that should already tell people how this system is going to work, and if you've done Eureka and Bozia, this shouldn't come as a surprise. The support job abilities are likely to be using those bonus actions that we have for things like special actions during trials, or for Eureka and Bozia, where you can assign 2 of them. Now, this is of course not confirmed, and they could be using a brand new system that's a little more intuitive, but I don't think there's any reason to suspect that you won't just need to have those 2 bonus actions actually keybound, which is a big complaint about those bonus actions. If you've never keybound your bonus actions, I highly advise before this comes out that you go into your key bindings and actually find where those are and update them to something that you can actively press. Now, we also have a screenshot of the support job window itself, something that will likely only be able to actually open when we're inside the Crescent Island or any of the exploration zones in this expansion. We have the selected support job of Phantom Freelancer, which is only level 1 and has no experience for the next level. I'll talk about that in a second, because that's very much a freelancer thing. We have the support action window, which is completely empty, and then we have support action settings. I assume that that button is what you'll press when you want to assign these support actions to those bonus action bars. Now, the big question there is we'd assume you can only have 2 at once. Maybe they come up with like a special reserve system so it's easier to swap them, maybe with a set cooldown, so you might feel like you have access to more than 2 skills at a time. But at the bare minimum, I assume that's how we'll swap it. One big thing with Eureka and Bozia is swapping those actions in order to do some crazy combos is how we got a lot of the really busted stuff that honestly Square Enix was perfectly okay with. The question is, will they still allow those kind of weird combinations to happen, something that's especially important with Freelancer shown here, or will they try to simplify it in a sense and make it so that you just have a couple of actions, and that's just kind of what you have. Maybe there's like a long cooldown on it so you can't swap often, but you can still maybe do those combos, just there's less pressure to do it. We also have support traits, and those we assume will just always be active. It looks like you don't have to set them in any capacity, and those will just be based on the level of the phantom job that you actually have equipped. Now, I mentioned that Phantom Freelancer is kind of a special case, and while I am going to talk about some of the job possibilities later, Freelancer in Final Fantasy V basically is a culmination of all of the jobs that you have leveled and mastered up to any point in the game. As you master them, the Phantom Freelancer takes on the traits of the other jobs, or I should say Freelancer in Final Fantasy V does. I assume Phantom Freelancer is something a lot of us will be using when we actually have all the other jobs mastered, as that was kind of the eventual end game in 5. I hope it's not so dominant in a sense that every player who levels every Phantom job will then end up on Freelancer. I don't think that really is good for this content and for Final Fantasy XIV's next exploration content, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind. We can assume the reason that it can't be leveled is either something story related, like they just entered the zone and there's like quests that stop you from leveling up, or that Phantom Freelancer is something that can't be leveled. You just pick up all of the support actions and traits from the other jobs that you have actually leveled. We'll have to wait and see, but that's the first job speculation that we have for this video. Now, we do have a second image to give us some ideas of some of the jobs that we're going to be seeing and some of the actions that they will actually have. For example, we have Phantom Job Monk, which will gain access to the Phantom Kick ability and Occult Counter, improving offensive capabilities. Now, this already gives us an idea that they are going to be trying to capture a lot of the Final Fantasy V-esque abilities that exist, which for some jobs is going to be incredibly strange, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. So, Phantom Kick makes sense. Kick in Final Fantasy V, you just kind of launch yourself across the screen and come back, and you kick every opponent on the screen. I don't know if this will be an AoE, but it's very possible that this could just launch you forward in a direction, dealing line AoE damage to anything in that area. So, you know, something, think of it like En Avant if it did damage, and you'll just like, you know, have your leg raised up the entire time. Occult Counter will likely just do a basic attack whenever you are attacked, or have a percentage chance of anytime you are hit doing a counter attack back. Something very simple, which for Warrior would just mean a bunch of extra axe swings. Like, imagine something uses 100 fists against you, and it's just swinging like, you know, 4 or 5 times a second. You just counter, 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 counter. The question is, will there be stuff to really empower your auto attacks on top of that? And I think there will be, though I don't know if it will be on Phantom Job Monk. We also have Phantom Job Bard here, which has access to the Mighty March ability. Now, we are going to go over more of Bard's songs. Again, we're going to be going over a lot of the Final Fantasy V details, but Mighty March was a regen ability in Final Fantasy V. It granted everyone around you bonus health. So it's saying improving supporting capabilities. I assume they're going to keep Mighty March's effect the same in providing a regen. We actually do have other songs in Final Fantasy V, things NPCs have used that have similar effects. So it's not too surprising to see this, as a lot of people have wondered if and when we would ever see these types of things. So those are just a few quick examples, but there are a lot of jobs in Final Fantasy V, most of which we probably won't see in the first iteration. I assume we'll get some jobs in this first one in Crescent Island, then more in the next zone that we get at some point, and depending on how many zones they do and how many jobs they actually want to add, however many they do add. Like, I just expect more over time, I guess is what I'm saying. So let's go over Final Fantasy V's jobs, what they do in Final Fantasy V, and how we can sort of extrapolate that into how they might work in Final Fantasy XIV. So I've already covered Freelancer, so I'm going to kind of go down the list here and just give you the basics of what each job does. And in Final Fantasy V, most jobs are very, very simple, and I assume that they'll have to kind of get creative to add things to some of these jobs in 14. For example, Knight, one of the very first jobs you get access to. It has Cover, which does exactly what you think. Takes hits for allies who cannot protect themselves. So Phantom Cover is very likely. Now that, of course, will likely be combined with other jobs, especially if Freelancer does what we think. Cover is not particularly popular nowadays, and it's very, very few fringe uses. But in Bozia, there were a lot of very interesting uses for things that had sort of similar effects. There was one particular one, I'm trying to remember what it was, and I remember that also having some interesting fringe case uses. Definitely not an ability I expect to be, you know, widely sought after, though. Guard, completely absorb a direct physical attack. There's actually quite a few jobs in Final Fantasy V that can completely nullify physical attacks through various means, and we've seen those represented in other Final Fantasy games, especially Final Fantasy XI. I assume this will function, Phantom Guard will function exactly like this. You'll be able to use it on occasion and completely nullify an attack. The big question is, how many bosses are you really going to want to use that on? Because Final Fantasy XIV is already so prevalent with its defensive capabilities. We do know that exploration content likes to create situations where you can use these things to just completely break fights. It's like using Reflect in the Red Shocktober one in Bosia, where you can almost nullify every attack other than the Tank Buster just by bringing Reflect. They're perfectly okay with stuff like that. So there's no reason to assume that, oh, they wouldn't do that, it's OP. No, that's exactly the point. That's why I'm letting you all know. Think that will be OP. Think it will work when it really shouldn't in most other cases in the game, because they don't care. They want you to go nuts here. So yeah, Guard will probably work exactly like that. The rest of their traits don't really make sense in 14. Two-handed just lets you wield a sword, katana, or axe with two hands to inflict twice the damage. And then equip shields, armor, and swords. We know 14's not built to just do that. You know what I mean? So unless there's like phantom armor and phantom swords or phantom shields, which might be cool. Maybe they just grant bonus effects and actually create these phantom objects around you. That might be an interesting take on it. And then phantom two-hander could be phantom, you know, I don't know, that could just be a big phantom sword along the same lines as the equip spell. So that's a possibility, but Knight's definitely one of the less creative jobs, as most of the early game jobs in Final Fantasy V are. Now, Phantom Monk, we already went over. Phantom Kick probably being an AoE melee attack. We also have Focus, which allows you to focus your energies to double the attack power of your next hit. Very popular ability. Different iterations of it do exist across the Final Fantasy franchise, and I expect Phantom Focus would probably do something similar. Use it before another really hard-hitting attack, and just do a ton of damage. Other than that, it has Chakra, which heals the monk and removes some debuffs. Removing debuffs off yourself can be pretty important, so I could see why that would be useful, especially as like a tank, as they showed the example with Warrior. We already know that it has a cult counter, so that's one of the things. And it usually gets bonus HP too. I do expect jobs that usually have like really high HP or really high MP to have something that emulates it. Obviously, MP is a little weird because, you know, they're not going to raise the MP over 10,000 most likely, but they may have something that interacts with your MP for some of the jobs. And the only other things it gets is barehanded, which just means if you don't have a weapon on that you know, just you do damages if you're a monk. It's really for like jobs that aren't monk wanting to be barehanded, but it takes up that slot, so it's just not really super useful. They could make barehanded so that if you are a monk, you just like do more damage. Like if you're monk, like monk plus phantom monk. Maybe it does more. Maybe it's phantom fists, and it's just fists that are around you, like I said with the equipped sword shield, all that stuff. I don't know. I think we've got a pretty decent idea how monk will work, though. I think the examples they gave were right along the lines of what to expect, at least starting up. Now, Thief is interesting because Thief is really more like a scout in Final Fantasy V. Yes, it has steal and mug in order to, you know, take things off of opponents, and maybe they incorporate that, but that's not something I actually think they'll do too much of. They might replace Mug with Aura Steal, which is something from Final Fantasy XI that thieves can do to steal a buff off of them. So, like, a good example would be Avni in Eureka, how he does that boost effect where he gets a ton of attack. I could see Phantom Aura Steal allowing you to steal an effect like that. Now, you have this insane attack multiplier, and that can be really good for a lot of jobs. So I think they might go that route, Phantom Aura Steal. But things like Find Passage, that's going to be up to seeing the Delubrum Reginae or like Baldessian Arsenal style raids, where it might just be that Phantom Thief can locate ground traps. There are other jobs, I think, that actually have similar effects, because Find Passages is specifically for finding hidden passages, like secret passages that lead down alternate corridors. They could incorporate that. There's no reason to assume there couldn't be fake doors that thieves can just spot by using a scout-like ability, so definitely put that there. But then Flee, Sprint, Vigilance, preventing back attacks, all that stuff doesn't seem too important. Like, maybe they just permanently increase movement speed at like a significant amount, and then maybe they have their own special like bonus sprint or bonus flee that they can do that's like way faster than normal sprint, so they can literally just bolt across. But yeah, I think this will be more of a like people bring it specifically for the large scale raids, and it's less of a thing for the smaller bosses outside of maybe the Aura Steal bit. Black Mage and White Mage, honestly, I don't know what they'll do. I think they have to get a little creative with these, because all Black Mage and White Mage do in Final Fantasy V is grant you access to Black Magic and White Magic. So I'd assume they would just pick a couple of Black Mage spells they think are cool. You know, funny thing is, Flare Star began as an ability in exploration content, and then we got our own version. Our own version is not nearly as good. So I wonder if they'll do something like that, like another version of Flare Star, or, you know, maybe a holy effect or something, but they're probably just going to pick some like really flashy White Mage skills or something. Like I'd imagine like Phantom White Mage gets access to a cure that like any job can equip cure. That was something that was really nice to have when you were doing like low man content, or when people didn't really know how to do a lot of the content when the exploration stuff first came out back in the day. So White Mage actually has immediate use. They could also, of course, bring back Protect or Shell. Like they usually have those things, and those are really, really popular. So somebody bringing Phantom White Mage for basic defensive capabilities, Stone Skin as well. A lot of the old stuff that we've gotten rid of is really expected. But Black Mage, I mean, maybe they bring like Phantom Mana Wall, or you know, again, Phantom Flare or something in that vein. Phantom Ultima. And then they also have MP traits. I honestly don't know what to expect. Maybe Black Mage will get a Phantom Convert equivalent, but instead it's I don't know, maybe it just raises your MP, but then also removes all MP costs for 10 seconds or something really like OP at the top. But it's going to be that. It's not just going to be whatever job you have equipped has like, I don't know, they just have like all Black Mage skills. It's not going to be that. I sincerely doubt, like, you press the button and all of your buttons are replaced with Black Mage skills. That'd be pretty wild, but I just don't think that's going to happen. I think these are just going to offer like basic things that we associate with these jobs. Now, I don't know if they'll do Phantom Blue Mage, but that is the next job on the list. If they do, I would assume they would just copy some of the abilities from Final Fantasy V. There's a bunch of different learned attacks, and a lot of them are pretty like Mighty Guard, White Wind. Honestly, the Blue Mage skills we have in 14, most of them are from Final Fantasy V. So I could definitely see it just being Phantom versions of the Blue Mage skills we have now. But the funny thing is, Blue Mage can't do exploration content. It's kind of a slap in the face. But hey, if Phantom Blue Mage is a thing, that's as close as he'll get, I guess. Blue Mage can also, like, scan opponents, like, check their HP and their special traits. Maybe they make use of that, too. Maybe there's, like, some bosses you have to scan them in order to understand, like, certain things that they're doing. But, consider me not an optimist that they'll do something along those lines. Nor do I think that's, like, a more... Like, that would have to be something they force you to do in order to make it useful. Like, they have the big bosses, like, oh, if you don't have a Blue Mage, you can't tell what they're doing. Almost like... If you've done T or even looked at T, you know how there's the whole codex thing? Like, what if you have to scan an opponent or you can't tell, like, where their AoEs are going to come from? You know what I mean? So it's like, that's the only thing that really comes to mind for Blue Mage. Then you have Red Mage. I suspect dual casting will probably be a thing. Maybe they'll just give it a raise, too. Like, Red Mage in 14 is regularly associated as the Raise Mage, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it have, you know, like, Occult Dual Cast and Phantom Raise. It's even White Mage, though, I expect to kind of have a Phantom Raise, potentially, so that's kind of tough. But I just, I don't know. I don't know if they'll just have weaker versions of what Black Mage and White Mage offer, or only, like, a certain number of those skills, but you can choose freely between those lower tier spells. But then you also, I'd also assume Occult Fast Cast to give you like way faster cast speeds would probably be a normal thing. So a lot of mages might really like this. But that's tough because it would be really hard for me as anyone other than a caster who can make use of Occult Dual Cast, or like imagine being a Black Mage and just going Phantom Red Mage and having Dual Cast. Like, that's kind of what I'm like. You already have so many, you know, free casts, but I can think of that being incredibly useful, being able to, you know, dual cast into like a Flare Star. Like, there's room for stuff like that. So, I think those are the most useful things for Red Mage. Now, Time Mage, they specifically called out because they were like, I don't know. They're like, I don't know. Time Mage doesn't really make sense for 14. So we want to do something like this in here. And this is a real question. So they really just get Time Magic and the ability to equip rods. Now, Final Fantasy V, rods are fantastic, sentence out of context, because you can break them and they do massive abilities. So they might do something equivalent to breaking a rod, but I don't know if that is really good enough. So then it comes down to the time magic, things like haste, slow. Gravity kind of falls between like green magic and time. It depends on the game, really. But like percentage-based HP damage. I could see those types of things being useful. Now, haste and skill speed, spell speed, effectively, are normally not really good stats. People really want to stick to very specific values, but normally you can get insanely fast to the point where people just don't care and they have fun with it inside of exploration content. I know I did that. I was a 1.6 GCD monk. I think I could have been down to 1.57 if I picked up the last piece of gear. And even 1.5 if I wanted to use certain skills in Bozy. Like, it was insane, and I loved it. So I assume Time Mage will work similarly. It's a question of how many bosses can be slowed. Will they force bosses to be slowed? Otherwise, their skills are too fast. So will you have that kind of force utility coming out of Time Magic? Or will they go with, like, a really original way of doing things for Time Mage? Will they just come up with entirely new concepts that they just don't think would normally work? I've long theorized about what Time Mage would look like in 14, and while yes, we do have Astro, I think there are ways to make it work even within the conventional 14. So I'm curious to see what they do here, because I think that there's a lot of ideas that just could have overlaps. This one's the one I'm the most curious about, especially because they called it out by name as the job we will likely never see in base 14. Then there's Summoner. Honestly, I have no idea what to expect. They do summon magic, and their only other ability is a random summon magic. Like, here's the thing. If they make brand new summon animations for Summoner, it's not going to be good. Like, everyone's going to be mad. Like, you know it, I know it. It's not a good idea. Maybe they skip Phantom Summoner altogether. Because any job being able to pull out, like, Titan Ifrit and Garuda, I don't think it's very interesting unless they have very unique effects like Phantom Garuda and Phantom Titan. But then if they make like Phantom Ramu or Phantom Odin, like if they do stuff like that, summoners, and honestly general players don't even play Summoner, but they feel bad for summoners, are gonna have a fit. And I get the whole idea of this content is to just kind of go wild, but like, I don't know about you, I just don't think it's a good idea. Then there's Berserker, which I fully expect to be a thing. And Berserker's main thing in Final Fantasy V is you cannot control the character. Like, all they do is continuously attack. You never have to tell them to do it. You can't stop them from doing it. And when they're leveled high enough, other jobs can equip axes. Like, yeah, you could give a Berserker barehanded and make them more like a monk Berserker. But I wonder if it's literally just going to be your auto attack potency goes up by like 5,000%. And you cannot use skills, and that's all it is. Like, or I wonder if they'll make it like an ability, like you use Phantom Berserk and then that effect occurs for the next however long. Like, you literally cannot control your character. Like, it auto follows the opponent. It's like you're charmed and you have no choice but to do anything. I could definitely see some flavor happening with that one, but again, it's gonna really depend on how they let us like swap through skills. Like, this is a Berserker having a Berserk skill, but that I start thinking about freelancer combos. Like, if you could do that plus some other like crazy action, so that there's a lot of possibilities with that one. So very curious. Then there's Mystic Knight, which is really associated as kind of a like magic defense tank, especially people who have played Final Fantasy XI, where we have Rune Fencer, which is kind of Mystic Knight-y. Their big thing is that they auto-cast Shell at low HP, and they add elements and spells to their attacks. So, like, when they do an attack, it may additionally cast a spell. And I honestly could see that happening. One thing I haven't really addressed so far in this video is we don't know if they're going to be doing more old-school style mechanics, things like elemental resistances or being able to, like, playing around anything where not every spell is equal, right? Like, something that's fire could be weak to water or ice, or something that's water could be weak to lightning, etc., etc. And if they do that, Mystic Knight becomes an interesting option, because adding effectively, let's say you have, you know, Thundaga Blade, for example, and you're on Warrior and you Fell Cleave, and every Fell Cleave adds a Thundaga cast, like, add it. I know that we have, that's not how our spells are named, but like, just say it's going to be Thundaga for this, for the sake of for the sake of the fact that it's Final Fantasy V. Let's just say it's Thundaga, right? And then something's weak to thunder. Like, I could see you bringing this if there's a lot of different elemental resistances in something like one of the large-scale raids, just to give you a damage edge that's consistent and doesn't really require a whole lot of play. I also expect them to have some sort of ability that's, you know, maybe Occult Magic Shell or Phantom Magic Shell, where you massively boost magic defense. I mean, I think that's the key thing with Mystic Knight, while the Spellblade bit is definitely it makes it one of the most popular jobs to level in Final Fantasy V, especially when comboed with other jobs and other abilities using Freelancer. Yeah, so I wonder, you know, that makes me wonder if you're gonna be able to use some skills from other jobs, because Final Fantasy V, most jobs have like an innate skill, and then they can equip a second skill. And even though you only get those two, which is very much what we're expecting here, the combos that become possible are actually quite engaging. Like, for having so few slots for skills, you can do a whole lot in 5. And Mystic Knight is one of the most common combo pieces. Ranger usually is something rapid fire plus Spellblade to hit, do the bonus spell, hit, do the bonus spell. You get 4 attacks. And I do expect that, you know, Phantom rapid fire for Bard will probably be a thing where whatever your next GCD is actually hits 4 times. It's kind of like a barrage, a single target GCD of some kind. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see that. And if they allow those combinations with the Phantom job settings, it's going to open up a lot of room without having to rely on Freelancer, where Freelancer can do all of the skills, but it gets 3 slots is the big things instead of 2. That's the reason. And it also borrows stats. But if they don't do any stat borrowing, then Freelancer getting a 3rd ability slot. I don't know. Yeah, it's just, I'm very curious. We'll get to that another time, because I don't think we can do anything but just keep speculating on that. So let's get to more jobs. Speaking of popular jobs, Mime is one of the other most popular jobs in Final Fantasy V. Very similar to Freelancer in a lot of ways. It effectively only has one skill, and that is to mimic the previously used action. And so I could totally see that just being the one thing it does. Like, you equip Mime, and then whatever your other skill is, you can effectively use it again immediately. So regardless of what the abilities do, there's probably tons of abilities where instantly doing it a second time has some sort of massive impact on what you're able to do. Like, even just looking at something as simple as like Phantom Focus, for example, like if that's a thing, doubles the attack power of your next skill. Like, if you mime that, then you just do multiple like giant hits back to back. And so that's not even a good example, and I think that's something. Mime was often used with mages, because Mime also got 3 slots on top of the Mime skill. So they would often just, like, bring big spells and then mime their own spells, or even just, you know, mime somebody else doing something really important. It just had it was definitely, like, the Freelancer equivalent for spell users for most Final Fantasy V players. But the Mime ability itself, the Mimic ability, I should call it, there's a lot of potential in that, so Mime somewhere down the line definitely seems like a possibility. Then there's Beastmaster or Trainer, whichever you want to call it. I don't know what to think, because obviously we haven't even gotten Beastmaster in 14. We're supposed to get it in late Dawn Trail. For those still waiting on news, expect it in 0.4x or 5x. Probably 4x if I had to guess. But like, Beastmaster has control. You take control of a monster for the duration of the battle. I don't think they'll do that. That's the very Final Fantasy XI style Beastmaster, where like you literally charm enemies out in the field, and then they like stay your pet for like a set period of time based on your stats. Like, not even a set, but like a variable period of time depending on what your stats are versus their stats, and like you have to gear up in order to charm really tough enemies for really long periods of time. So most people end up just charming weak enemies and then chaining them together. I don't think they'll do all that. It's because like when you're locked away in an arena, like you can't, what are you going to charm? Like maybe you can charm, maybe they add like ads to some fights and Beastmaster can charm them and then it'll start attacking the boss instead of attacking the party. So maybe that's a way to mitigate like a really dangerous attack, so it has that fringe use case. It's possible. Equip whips. I mean, I don't think they'll Phantom Whip. I mean, maybe like I said earlier. But then calms beasts or inflicts stop. Basically, it inflicts stop on any non-human or machine enemy. Stop could be a thing. There's no reason to suspect that it wouldn't be Phantom Calm. And then there's Catch, which is to catch a monster, and then you can send it back at the opponent one time. I just feel like anything... it's crazy to think that of all the things I don't know how they would make it work, it's Beastmaster, because we're getting it technically. But Beastmaster has to be like developed into its own content. And I just don't see them taking the steps to make it. Like, maybe they just give you certain Phantom Beasts, and the Phantom Beasts do skills. Like, I think that's the only way that they're going to do it. I think that's how most people expected a Beastmaster to work in 14, without the whole catching and releasing or catching and controlling bits. I think that's how people expect it to be. Just you literally channel beasts into attacks. They appear for the attack and then go away, almost like, you know, Ifrit, Garuda, and Titan in a sense. So if anything, that's the only possibility I see. Plus the stop and control, which do have potential uses, but they'll have to design for it. Then there's Geomancer. Now, Geomancer is an interesting one. We saw the Geomancer job sprite, so it's definitely one of the ones they're looking at and probably going to include in the first tier. And basically, Geomancer's big thing, first of all, it can find pits. I do think that will be relevant in the large-scale raids, like for finding either pits in the ground or actually finding ground traps, like we were talking about earlier with Thief with Find Passage. Light Step, avoid damage on floors with harmful effects. Totally could see that too. They can't trigger ground traps. Maybe in the like large scale raid, like the Delibram Savage equivalent, maybe there's just a spot where there's literally no way around the ground trap, and the ground trap will kill anyone who goes near it. And you don't want to waste reses, so a Geomancer being able to just walk over it safely totally makes sense. But the actual Geomancer bit is they basically have attacks that are based on their current area. So like if they're in a cave or they're in the ocean. I don't think 14, even in this isolated content, is designed in such a way where they can accurately differentiate where you actually are and change your skill set for it. I think it's more likely that Geomancer will create ground effects, and then they have abilities that will alter depending on what ground effect they actually place. So they could have, like, you know, place field or place land. And sorry, magic's in my head a little bit. And then while on the land, they get that ability transforms into something that is a Final Fantasy V reference, like Branch Arrow, Branch Spear, Leaf Swirl. Or if you go to water, Waterfall, Tsunami, Whirlpool, like transform into one of those skills. I would like to really see it be more supportive and provide buffs to anyone in these field effects, while the Geomancer themselves also gets these powerful bonus skills. In Final Fantasy XI, they create Luopons, and they can permeate buffs from themselves. So like the Luopon can permeate a buff and the Geomancer permeates a buff. So you can stack those and it gets really, unless it's mitigated by design, it gets absolutely absurd and out of hand. And I could see them doing that. I could see them just having like field buffs that the Geomancer gets bonus effects for to make them very supportive, but also a little bit offensive. Then you've got Ninja, which is really interesting. So Ninja dual wield is just kind of weird. Obviously, we have that by default. So Occult dual wield, I don't really know what that would do. Throw, being able to toss weapon scrolls and shurikens, unless they just have like effectively a Fuma Shuriken looking skill, or like throw lightning scroll, throw fire scroll, like very specific throw skills. I don't know how they'll do that necessarily. I think they could actually make a pretty funny animation for it if they wanted to. First Strike increases the chance of having first attack. I don't know what Occult First Strike would look like. Maybe it just like creates a chance that like you'll do a second hit to a skill. So it's like you're adding a First Strike version of the skill and then a second strike. And yes, again, I am thinking of Magic, how First Strike does the damage before the calculation, and then the Cloud card from the Magic the Gathering collaboration effectively does what I'm suggesting this does. One of the two Cloud cards that does, not the big commander one, the other one that we saw. Image is definitely something I expect. I think they'll just call it Utsusemi. It's called Utsusemi in Final Fantasy XI. It's a very, very well-known skill. I think one of the Ninja job NPCs even has Utsusemi. But yeah, creates an illusion that absorbs physical attacks. I mean, that's what Utsusemi did in 11. That's what most people associate it with. And I think that'll come back here. It'll be a means of mitigating a few physical attacks, almost certainly. And then Smoke. That's usually a Flee equivalent. They could make it like a blind effect, and if there's enemies that like you really want to blind, it's useful. So I don't know, Ninja's got a lot of ones that they kind of just have to design specific skills for it, like not just throw, because they're not going to ask you to keep like stuff in your inventory. They're not going to be like, oh, stock up on shurikens from, you know, the monsters you find in the field or something. You know what I mean? Like they're probably just going to have like throw, Fuma Shuriken, like, or just other throw skills, so you can get access to stuff while not being on. You got to remember, it's not ninjas using Phantom Job Ninja. It's like warrior using it. So any ability to access a skill that is represented by the job just needs to be designed in such a way it's interesting to use. So throwing specific things that have different effects, like lowering defense, lowering attack, having status ailments, whatever, all it needs to be able to do is that plus Utsusemi, and you've got a pretty well-functioning job. It's just a question of some of the more vague skills that it has, like dual wield and First Strike and Smoke. Like those, I'm not 100% sure how they're going to make interesting unless they create fringe cases for them, which is something I do expect them to do. Then you've got Ranger, which realistically has aim, equip bows, and rapid fire. Rapid fire is probably the most popular one, performs 4 weaker attacks at once. I assume it's just going to be like a barrage that you can give to anyone. It probably only works on single target attacks and probably doesn't work on spells. It's probably a weapon skill specific thing. So Phantom Rapid Fire, definitely a thing. Phantom Aim or Occult Aim is something that's definitely worth expecting. Accuracy actually usually plays a role in exploration content at certain times. So being able to never miss in a sense, or be able to raise your accuracy in such a way that if an opponent has some sort of ability to dodge, it's not something you need to worry about, is actually very likely. And then it's got animals, where you just like summon rabbit, squirrel, bees, nightingale, a flying squirrel, a falcon, a skunk, a boar, and even a unicorn. I fully expect the Phantom Unicorn, which is an AoE full heal to the party. I know it's weird to hear Ranger have that, but yeah, Phantom Unicorn, I think, is probably going to happen. I know some people are going to think of the 11 equivalent, where it's really more of like a pure ranged DPS, and I think that's possible. Most of its, honestly, even 2 of its skills here, like the other skill I didn't mention is Equip Bow, or they didn't talk about much as that. But I think that they could also, because Eagle Eye Shot's obviously always on people's mind. We have Eagle Eye Shot in Eureka. I'm sure they wouldn't be shy to use it again. And then there's all sorts of other skills that they could give it. Again, most people will cite Final Fantasy XI's Ranger as a potential. But I think they really do want to stick with a lot of Final Fantasy V stuff. So the different animals I do expect to show up, and I think it will be pretty funny. Then there's Bard right after that. They have the ability to hide. I wouldn't be surprised to see if they get something that lets them go invisible so they can sneak around. Equip Harps, which I don't expect to do anything. And Sing. So I mentioned Mighty March being a regen on the party, but their other songs are Sinewy Etude, which raises party strength. In this case, probably they could do a song for physical damage, a song for magic damage. I do actually think they will separate them and not make it overall damage. So Sinewy Etude and Mana's Pain would be the physical and magical damage equivalent songs. Swift Song raises the party's speed. Totally expect to see a Phantom Swift Song in there. Hero's Rhyme raises the party's level. Now that sounds stupid, but if they create situations where, like, let's say a boss has an uninterruptible level 5 death that targets a party, having Hero's Rhyme raising your level by 1 would be a pretty big deal. Raising your level by 1 in Final Fantasy XIV can also play to the accuracy bit, where accuracy actually changes when there's a level differential between you and an opponent. So it could be another way of working around increasing accuracy. There are cases where even in 14, the idea of raising the party's level is actually possible. Requiem damages undead. I actually do expect Phantom Requiem to show up, and I do expect it to be used largely against undead as a big damage source. Romeo's Ballad for Stop. It's not the only ability with Stop, and I do think Stop will probably work in here in some capacity. And Alluring Air, which is an AoE Confuse. They might do a Phantom Alluring Air, but I think they've got enough other songs, and they probably won't include all of them. So they seem to want to go with the support routes, so just expect a bunch of these songs to pop up. Then there's Dragoon, literally has Jump. It has Jump, Equip Spear, and most importantly, Lance. If you play Final Fantasy X, you may know it as Lancet, or even some of the other games, which drains enemy HP and MP. Phantom Lancet, I do think that it will show up. Phantom Jump, I think, could show up as well. What they'll actually do that stands out, I don't know. Like, maybe just, I'd assume there's going to be other stuff. Like, they'll create things on top of it. Dragoon just happens to be a really simple job in Final Fantasy V. So Phantom Jump and Phantom Lance, totally expect those to show up. What occult skills they'll do, who knows? But, yeah, those are, at least are the bare minimums. Then there's Dancer. Dancer can charm enemies with Flirt. Then it has some dances. That's it, really. Tempting Tango confuses an enemy. Mystery Waltz absorbs MP. Jitterbug Duet absorbs HP. And Sword Dance does a quadruple power physical attack. Sword Dance could just be a buff. Jitterbug could be like, these could be like buffs. Like maybe Jitterbug Duet makes it so that everyone in your party will restore HP every time they land a weapon skill. And Mystery Waltz could be, every time they land a spell, they absorb MP. So, like Black Mages, for example, would get more of their MP back. Or even like if an enemy has like a big MP drain, just the ability to provide some degree of support for people as they're going through and casting their spells. Another total possibility. They could also just make these like, just restores HP over time, restores MP over time. Totally doable. And since Mighty March kind of does something similar with the regen, like, that's a reason why they could do it here, but I also would like to see them be more creative and not just do the same thing, because then you start to fight over which Phantom job is better to use. So I'd rather see it just have a different effect that still achieves a similar goal. Then there's Samurai, which has Mineuchi, which stuns enemies. I mean, that's honestly pretty standard. Zeninage, which is basically Gill Toss. Maybe, I assume they'll actually probably have Phantom Gill Toss, but I assume it won't cost your actual Gill, mind you. Shirahadori, catch and stop enemy attacks. Now, that's something that would be awesome. So basically, it allows you to, in Final Fantasy V, before the game would even calculate evasion, it checks for the chance for Shirahadori to just nullify the attack. And I could just see that being like Occult Shirahadori, 25% chance that the next attack is just nullified. Like that every attack is nullified. Totally something I could expect to happen. Equip Katanas, don't expect much from that. And Ianuki, charges for 1 turn, then inflict death through immunity. I could see like a 30-second cast time, and this working on, like, most non-bosses. Like, you know how we normally have, like, NMs, like those star enemies around the Bozia map, or, like, Eureka has some really high-level enemies? Like, I could totally see Ianuki being, like, a 30-second cast time that you can only use in combat, but will one-shot anything. And you could see parties set up where it's literally just, like, a tank holding a mob that's, like, really dangerous. And then you just have Ianukis, and then it's got, like, a cool... I could totally see that, because instant kill shenanigans are very common in exploration content. So I do think that's going to make that there's going to be a Phantom Ianuki in this, for sure. Then we've got Chemist. True story. I think it was Sage was almost called Chemist. I think Sage was almost called a handful of things, because they said they designed Sage and then named it afterwards. I'm pretty sure Chemist was one of the things they said they almost considered naming it. It's going to be interesting, because they're almost certainly just going to give you Phantom potions, like, that are built into the job. So they have Pharmacology, which doubles the effect of potions and ethers. I assume that will be a trait, so that if you're, like, let's say you're... Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess it depends. Again, we still don't know enough about how the traits and the actions work. But if you could use Pharmacology on a different job, like Freelancer or something else, but you don't have the... I'm sorry, if you could use a potion on another job, but you don't have Pharmacology, then, you know, it's just not as good. They could just make it like Occult Pharmacology, and maybe health potions are just useful in this content instead of making the potions a job action. It's possible. Mix, combine items to create concoctions. I've often said that if they ever did add Chemist to 14, it would honestly be like a support ninja, where, you know, they press 3 buttons to mix things together. I do not think they will create a whole UI to do that. So I don't really know what to expect from a Phantom Mix. So good luck with that. Maybe they just make it so, like, you have Occult Mix, and then when you press the buttons that you have assigned to the job, they're actually just all ingredients. So, like, maybe you just learn a whole bunch of ingredients as your Phantom skills, and then you have Occult Mix, and you press those to make combinations, and then, like, as you level up, maybe you get, like, enhanced Occult Mix, or, like, the result is stronger and stuff like that. So you still have to kind of know what ingredients to bring, or to put on your bar, not to actually bring items. And that gives you some good viabilities. Like, maybe one person has a chemist with one, then they're set up to do one type of mix or 2 types of mixes, and a different chemist is set up to do different ones. So you can, like, maybe have one buffing allies, one debuffing enemies, and that way there's less overlap. That actually, now that I say it, I think that's the big thing that it's going to do. I think the recover, revive, drink, I don't think any of that's going to be relevant. Those are its other abilities. I think it's literally going to be all about Phantom Mix, and that's going to be the big thing. Now, those are all the jobs from the base version of Final Fantasy V, but we know that they're reaching into the, I don't know what to call it, I guess the re-releases of the game, the GBA and mobile port, which are now defunct, mind you. Pixel Remaster does not have these jobs. But we know Cannoneer, which is one of the 4 bonus jobs they added in, like, the GBA and mobile versions, and what was on Steam for a little while. We know that is in there. They showed the artwork for it, so there's no reason not to expect it. And Cannoneer is honestly like a chemist if one of the ingredients was always gunpowder, because that's what it does. It combines a type of cannon gunpowder with another item and then creates like massive effects, like super big damage to specific types of enemies or major elemental or non-elemental attacks, status ailments. So that's a big thing. It also has open fire, which just shoots an enemy with a chance of death, blind, poison, or confuse. Could totally see that being a thing. But it's also the one job that has EXP up as a trait. So we don't really know how leveling Phantom Jobs works. But if you could get the EXP up trait from Cannoneer to speed up leveling the other jobs, if it works that way, I don't think it will personally, but I'm just saying that's a possibility. I just got to put it out there. Then there's Gladiator, which has Lure, which I'd assume is an AoE provoke. Well, it is an AoE provoke in 5. I assume they would make it like Ultimatum in Final Fantasy XIV. By the way, bring back Ultimatum. Finisher, it either crits, does an elemental attack, or nothing. There's a few like calculations that go into that, but I don't know, Phantom Finisher having like this RNG effect. If the effects are really, really good, it could happen, but I don't know about that one. Long Reach, attack from full power from the back row. And then Blade Blitz, which deals slightly weaker attack to all enemies. So I think it's like 75% of your attack value. But it's dealt to every enemy on the field. I could totally see them getting that, a Phantom Blade Blitz and Phantom Lure. The question is, it needs more than that. So maybe if they change Finisher, or maybe Blade Blitz leads into Phantom Finisher. Like maybe it transforms into Phantom Finisher. That's always a possibility as well. And maybe it's like, depending on how many targets you hit, the Finisher changes. If you hit none, then Finisher doesn't show up. If you hit like 1, it turns into a massive crit. And if you hit multiple, it turns into like a follow-up AoE elemental. I don't know. I don't think they have the technology to do that personally, but or maybe they haven't figured it out, or they haven't put the effort in for it. But it's a possibility, so I'll throw it out there. Then there's Oracle. Now, Oracle just has so many different effects. It basically is almost like a weather job, whereas Geomancer is like a ground effect job. Oracle's like a weather job. So it has like Condemn, which has just a bunch of different elemental attacks that can, they either do elemental damage or single target damage, or they have like some sort of status effect or heal. It just does like almost everything, basically. And then there's Predict, which is an AoE version of most of those attacks that does way more damage, but also has requires a certain amount of time, depending on like what tier of spell you're using. And that same, I mean, it does like AoE water damage plus Toad, AoE fire damage plus Sap, AoE non-elemental damage plus Death. You know, AoE earth damage to enemies and allies. That's toxic. Hope that's not in there. It could be really funny though. You know, AoE holy damage and heals allies. Like it does those kind of effects. I think that one's pretty straightforward. I think they can just include these and the end result can be kind of random, but always kind of strong at the same time. I would just worry about Rockslide. We know they're not afraid to kind of make some trolling skills when it comes to Eureka and Bozia. We've seen plenty of people accidentally murder themselves with things like the dice in Bozia, or blowing themselves up with various different skills in Eureka and Bozia. So as long as it only kills the Oracle, I'd be okay with that. But those are the big things that it does. Also, it has the ability to read ahead to half encounter rate. I doubt that'll play any role. And it also has ability point up. So same deal, like we don't really know how the progression system of Phantom Jobs will work. So if EXP or ability point up, maybe that could... here's the thing. EXP up could be increasing knowledge level, which seems to be unassociated with Phantom Jobs. And ability point up could be leveling Phantom Jobs. It's entirely possible both these jobs have these types of skills, and they would probably put them later in. Cannoneer early would make sense for the knowledge level stuff, but they might put something like Oracle later on in one of the future zones, so that like players that are coming in when they get there, they know to wait for this until they do some big leveling on their Phantom Jobs. And finally, Necromancer. I do think Necromancer is going to make an appearance. I know we like to talk about how, you know, oh, Necromancer doesn't work because different regions, but Necromancer, as long as there's no skeletons, Necromancer is fine. Like, if you just have undead, but there's no, like, bones or skeletons shown, then that's how, like, League of Legends gets around things like Karthus, for example. And part of their redesign for Karthus was to, you know, make him more globally, just by default, more globally usable. So they're automatically undead, which means any healing actually hurts them. And I forget how, I think drain effects heal them is how it works. No, because a drain effect would still, yeah, it just makes it that healing spells, just anything that healing hurts them. Yeah, because they have like drain touch to absorb HP. I think that's like the only way they realistically heal is through draining. But then they have like, again, it's honestly, it's just a bunch of really, really strong spells. Meltdown, Hellwind, Evil Mist, Chaos Drive, Doomsday, which is a very popular spell, and I do think that Phantom Doomsday, massive damage to all enemies, totally possible thing. And then they can also call forth demons. Now, one of the demons they have here is Skeleton. Again, I think they would probably undo that one just to make it easier. But they have Flaremancer, Ragil Forms, and a Zombie Dragon, which all deal like elemental damage or on single targets or AoE or poison damage and stuff. I do think Necromancer will probably make an appearance at some point way down the line. And I think that it will probably have some similar effects to that stuff. And that's all the jobs that are in Final Fantasy V. I assume that this is kind of the limit of the jobs they will go for. I don't think they'll reach for stuff that's in like Final Fantasy Tactics or 10-2 or any of the really obscure jobs that we have across some of the other titles. That being said, they have for the main game. I mean, Astro is literally one NPC in Tactics, and yet they made it a full job in 14. And this is just the kind of content where they could go nuts. So maybe there's a Phantom Calculator at some point. You know, I'm just going to say, I don't think it's copium if people say things like that. I don't think it'll happen, but I don't think it's that big of a cope to think that maybe they could reach outside the bounds of Final Fantasy V and mess around with some of the other jobs. Overall, though, these side progression systems are really what makes this content as fun as it is. It just lets you break the rules, and you might feel like you're doing something the game shouldn't allow, but they were totally okay with like flare star cheesing duels and Bosia, and like they've even said in interviews, people will like put on the forums, there's no way this is allowed, and the dev team is like, yes, we literally made it that way so that there's all sorts of broken things, like go nuts, figure it out, do it, get it done. So that's what's always so fun about this stuff. And yet it still finds a way to maybe be challenging in some capacity, especially when you don't know all that cheese stuff before it's figured out. Even if you try to go the conventional route, you can normally get a pretty good mix of challenging and honestly just kind of casual playability. There's a good range of skills that usually benefit from this style of content and can find a lot of fun in it. So really interested to see what the Phantom job system will have to bring, and really looking forward to having exploration content back after missing it for an entire expansion. Basically an expansion and a half, since we gotta wait till 0.2x at some point for this to come out. But anyway, that is going to be a wrap for this video. Let me know some of your thoughts and predictions in the comment section of the video below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned as we get closer to patch 7.2x. You can also check out some of my other stuff, such as my Magic the Gathering / Final Fantasy collaboration pack related stuff that I went over earlier this week, as well as my Let's Play for Final Fantasy XI in 2025, which releases every Wednesday. With that, I will see you in the next one, and until then, take care.